In the program Current Affairs, now we bring you a discussion on measures to revive economic growth. The participants are D.C. Gupta, former Finance Secretary, Anjan Roy, former Chief Economic Advisor, FICCI, and Sanjay Jha, India Bureau Chief, ITN News, London, who initiates and moderates the discussion.
India's new Reserve Bank Governor Raghuram Rajan marked his first policy meeting today with a bold decision to hike interest rates, wrong footing analysts, and leading to sharp falls on the stock market. Mr. Gupta, how do you react to his first credit policy?
No, when Dr. Rajan took over as the governor of RBI, at that time in his first directional talk or address to the economy, he had already initiated a number of measures, as we know. This is a structured first policy announcement which has been made. And if you really see, everything has been kept unchanged, except that marginal standing facility, which was hiked by 300 points to 10.25, has been reduced by 75 basis points. And there is a hike in the repo rate of 25 basis points. I was watching Dr. Raghuram's interaction with media. Now, he said that in effect, it is bringing down the cost of funds for the banks. Because if you see the totality, MSF has been reduced by 75 basis points, but repo has gone up by 25 basis points. So it has been interpreted by the market as if the short term we are trying to reduce it, but long term we are maintaining it, because repo rate is being thought of as long term availability of financial window. So he made a point that ultimately what has happened is the cost of funds for the banks will go down, and he expects that they should be transmitted also. Second thing, what he has said is that earlier that CRR 99% has to be maintained on day-to-day basis. It has been also reduced, giving further respite to the banks. Now the issue is basically that the market reaction was very interesting. I think the market reacted adversely, if you see the Sensex. But my view is that market, particularly the Sensex, the way it works, you cannot treat it as a barometer of what
of the economic health.
So therefore, the basic emphasis in the credit policy has been, again, concern for inflation. And going forward, the RBI governor said that they will definitely be also looking at the growth perspective, because we have just come out from the current account deficit volatility of rupee. So I think it's a very wise decision, very cautious step which has been taken by RBI. I'm happy that they have said that they will be monitoring it, and as the situation demands, the prescription will be provided for the economy.
Anjan, industry has been demanding all kinds of SOPs from the central bank as well as from the government. And in his first policy announcement as a governor, Dr. Rajan ordered a rise in the benchmark interest rate from 7.25 to 7.50 at today's mid-quarter policy review. What kind of signal is he trying to send to the industry?
The basic argument for repo rate is that inflation is high. So the hike in the repo rate will be working as anti-inflationary. At least that is what the Reserve Bank is thinking, and that this will douse the inflationary expectations. Now, we have been trying this same remedy for last 3 years. It has not worked. This is copybook economics, raising interest rate and controlling inflation. This is copybook economics of the Western variety. Now, what is the nature of Indian inflation? Indian inflation, if you see that today manufactured goods inflation is very low. Inflation is driven by food prices. And all the food prices, wheat, rice, onion, vegetables, these prices are going. Now, are these interest elastic, or inflationary expectations about these prices, are these linked to interest rate? It looks no. Going by past experience, several technical studies have also been done by RBI which do not indicate this kind of linkages. Okay, you will see that in an environment of high inflation, consumer price inflation, downward revision of repo rate or not raising repo rate is not done. This is convention. But you could have gone a little ahead of this and tried out how to incite the growth instincts, growth drivers in the economy. What we are seeing that IIP is flat. Segments of IIP industry are contracting, and our imports are rising. Actually, if growth falls, then imports should come down, CAD should come down, but reverse is happening because there is demand in the economy and this demand is being met from. That is the reason why we are having this explosive expanding CAD. Now, the need of the hour is supply side intervention. That is, you increase manufactured goods production, you increase agricultural goods production, make availability in the market and bring down prices. A copybook economics of interest rate hike, monetary intervention for this kind of inflation control is not possibly the right thing, as Mr. Chidambaram has been talking about for the last several months. We need some growth impulses which can be had by bringing down the interest rate a little. Now, in this credit policy, this is a very complex and nuanced credit policy. In the sense, he has raised one, he has brought down another. It is as if Raghuram is sitting over a control panel for the economy, computerized control panel. The ultimate impact will be on the basis of how these two rates play out each other.
And we saw today it obviously didn't play out in a very positive way. Mr. Gupta, with the hike in repo rate, obviously the RBI is putting its focus squarely back on managing inflation and fiscal deficit. We saw the government is struggling to curb the fiscal deficit and it is taking steps. They are not worried about it. A couple of days back, we held a slew of austerity measures, and that included like circular to all the government departments banning meetings at 5-star hotels, restricting air travels by senior official to economy class. The Finance Ministry also directed ministry and departments not to buy new vehicles, create fresh jobs or fill posts lying vacant for over a year. Do you think these are symbolic gestures or do they actually achieve anything in saving the money for the government?
No, I take the point first about inflation management which my colleague made it just now. Let us understand things very clearly. Monetary policy has a very limited role to play as far as the inflation management is concerned. That is with regard to controlling the money supply only. It is admitted fact that India's inflation, particularly food, cereals, protein-based and other things, are largely driven by structural imbalances in the system, for which a lot of steps have to be taken by the government which is beyond the domain of the monetary policy. So let us not confuse and say and be uncharitable to Dr. Rajan saying that he is sitting before the computer and following the copybook solution. I don't agree with this kind of oversimplified version.
And we should give him credit.
We should give him, after all, he is sending a hint. What he can do it for monetary policy. Monetary policy is very, very small thing. Now let us take the case. In a project economics, anybody will tell you that the interest element in the total project cost is very nominal. It is not so much the question of interest, it is the question of the cost of funds for the banks. That is why MSF was raised by 300 points by Dr. Subbarao. And what he has done is, because this was done in order to control the liquidity which were driving down the value of rupee, therefore they have rolled it down after things have changed and reduced it by 75 basis points. But by increasing the repo rate, what you are trying to send a signal is that I am still serious about managing money supply which should not be contributing to inflation. But that does not mean that other measures need not be taken.
I have a counter question. If he has such a good intention, so why did the market fail to understand that message?
I told you, I was watching the screen. Market was up by more than 500 points as it opened. Within 15 minutes, it started down, 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 down. And by tomorrow you might see it will again come up. Because there are various factors players do it, and somebody was remarking it. The players are limited in the market. Our market is not broad and wide.
Yeah.
We should not go, this is not a barometer. It has got lots of other effects. So therefore, saying that Sensex has not reacted does not necessarily mean the policy is not good. I have always discounted that kind of possibility. Regarding the second question you asked, of the austerity measures,
fiscal deficit and austerity measure of the government.
Now, I would not say it is symbolic only. It is symbolic in the sense that the amount of saving which the government will get out of it will not really matter so much. But it sends a message that yes, government is serious about curtailing the expenditure, particularly the non-planned expenditure. Number one. Number two, I would have been happy if government would have taken some bolder decisions. Even in this non-planned side, bolder decision was like You are saying that we will not allow you to create new posts. There is umpteen number of reports available in the government where they have said that we have such a large government which is not required. So therefore, there is a need to trimming down the size of the government, which will really make a difference, not only in terms of money saved, but also in terms of efficiency improved. Now that nobody is willing to touch it, and I can understand the apprehension because of the political compulsions around the corner election, etc. But that should be the measure. Second thing is, in non-plan expenditure, when you are talking of controlling fiscal deficit, we will have to see what further steps are taken with regard to passing on reducing the subsidies, particularly fuel subsidies and others. Because if you increase it, it is going to add to further inflationary pressure. So somewhere the equation has to be worked out. But one thing I am happy, I am not that I was a former government servant, therefore I am saying, to be honest, of late, last 6 months or 1 year, after the things have assumed crisis proportions, I am happy the government is really serious about fiscal deficit. Otherwise they never bothered about it. They breach the FRBM limits every time. They postpone the FRBM targets. Now what message is, you may say that I have done it primarily because I wanted more resources, I wanted to spend social sector spending, I wanted to increase other expenditure which was required. Fine. But then you allowed the fiscal deficit to increase beyond a limit.
Mr. Gupta, you mentioned plotted government's role. One side, government is trying to cut down the cost by not hosting the events, programs, not giving the government officers the benefits which they deserve. At the same time, the government is taking a decision that lets the bureaucrats go to outside India for the medical treatment. What kind of dichotomy we are talking about?
I think it's a lack of coordination somewhere in the government. If somebody has issued the circular from the Department of Personnel, it does not mean the expenditure is incurred immediately, and nobody should grudge that if one sector of people are getting that benefit, why not the others should get it? It should be given to everybody if it comes to that, if you can afford it. So I don't think that much issue should be made on that. These are very, very small things which are being highlighted in press, which are being highlighted by some people, but we never talk of things which happen under the carpet.
Anjan, Mr. Gupta obviously highlighted, the government's interest about curbing the fiscal deficit. Do you buy the arguments that not having a conference in a hotel, cutting down a slew of austerity measures, we can actually tame down the fiscal deficit?
Before answering this one, I just refer to what he has said about being simplistic about it. See, I'm not being simplistic. What I am doing is, I am simplifying what very complex move that Raghuram Rajan has taken. Because see, by fiddling with the interest rates, you are affecting bond yields. You are affecting the kind of speculation that one can do on the rupee futures. All these varied interest rates are affected by one single move of the RBI. Today itself, bond yields have increased because of this. So, entire spectrum of financial markets have been affected by these two decisions. And how these two decisions play out each other, this is what I am emphasizing, will determine what course the financial markets will take, because this will be noted by even the non-deliverable forward contracts market abroad, which has developed in rupee and which are directly influencing the rupee forward premium and rupee exchange rate. We have no control over them, excepting that these interest calculations. That is why MSF was raised by Subba Rao to control speculative positions in Indian rupee. So anyway, setting that aside, about fiscal deficit, let me point out, if you look at fiscal deficit, the biggest amount of expenditure of the government is on interest on public debt. This takes up nearly 33% of the government's revenue and income. Now, unless you are tackling that, how do you tackle that? By not contracting more public debt, which is in effect again connected with your fiscal deficit. So the entire cycle. Second is the amount of money you are spending on defense. It is the second biggest, these are the big heads of government outlay expenditure. Now, if you can achieve some kind of economy on these big heads, you will make the FRBM target very easily. It is very difficult. Now, what is, however, being attempted, these are, frankly speaking, not very effective steps in the context of overall fiscal deficit, but these throw out certain signals that the government is trying to bring down superfluous expenditure. Along with this, if the government is attacking the big heads of expenditure and controlling, then we will see certainly some meaningful contraction in fiscal deficit, and we will be able to come over the hunch.
But Anjan, this is not the first time when government has announced such a scheme. The government had announced similar austerity measures some months before the finance minister imposed wide-ranging spending cuts to meet a tough fiscal target. It happened around the time of recession. It happened even after that. Every year it happens. So is it becoming like the fashion, because you have to announce that so that it sends out some message? Or do you think, as some economists have said, that these measures can actually lead to the saving of, say, 0.3 to 0.4% of the GDP? Do you find it substantial?
Not even that. Savings should not translate more than 2,000 crores or 5,000 crores. You see, let us understand, as the Anjali raised the point, what is the composition of government expenditure? Now, if you take the non-plan expenditure, which constitutes about 70% of the total budget, of the 70% expenditure, the nature of that non-plan expenditure, which he mentioned, defense, interest, pensions, salaries, etc., works out to be 80%, which is totally inflexible. It is totally inflexible because you have to pay interest. You will have to maintain defense.
Actually, what you can do is treasury management, in the sense that banks are always doing this. You can do interest swaps or that kind of thing. For example, sometimes interests are going down, so you contract debts at the time when interest is
going down. Anjali, let me tell you one thing. We tried it in the last regime when I retired at that time. About 2002, 2003 we tried it. We tried to do it with external loans as well as internal, domestic loans. External loans, we were quite successful because number of them could be consolidated because foreign governments were involved. Internal, we tried to swap it because most of the loans which government has, what are they? They are in the form of the bonds owned by the bank. So when I want to do it and swap it, the bank will get the hit in their balance sheets. And therefore, when we tried to do it, we dropped it halfway because it just did not come up. I think we started with a target of 15,000 crores as far as I remember, but we ended around 4,000 crores and we said drop it. So the swapping and all that can be done for an industry, for a bank, for restructuring of a concern, not for the government.
Not for the government. I'm slightly moving away. We saw the resurgence of rupee. We saw the economy, getting, foreign investors have started putting back the money into the stock market, and there was a rally. Before today there was a rally in the stock market. The rupee also became very strong. So there are all positive signals coming out. Did you think it's a temporary blip, or it is going to be the permanent feature for the economy?
This is temporary.
It's completely temporary. And that is why I am saying that Sensex cannot be the barometer of any fundamentals.
No, actually, funds were not coming into the equity market or in the Sensex equities. Funds were coming into the bonds.
The bonds, yes.
The point is, actually what is happening, why this resurgence suddenly? Because today Governor has indicated, he has given out the figure also, we have collected $1.4 billion in the course of last possibly 10 days or 1 week through these two swap windows that Raghuram Rajan introduced. FCNRB and the other banks bringing in funds which will be swapped with the RBI. Now, what are these funds? These are funds, essentially very temporary funds or medium-term funds which we are bringing in for the sake of shoring up rupee and which we will have to repay again. So, we are actually postponing the day of reckoning. I mean, for the time being, rupee will recover. Then, unless the CAD level is more or less contained, stabilized, that is, and look at that CAD. If you examine the CAD figures, $40 billion is our trade deficit with China alone. That means what? What I was referring to. You go and search for an electric kettle, it will invariably be made in China, which we are buying. This is getting reflected in the CAD of 40 billion. Deduct that 40 billion from our CAD is no problem. So this is and of course oil bill. I compliment Mr. Moily for his bold steps which are encouraging production of hydrocarbons, oil, gas in the country. If this goes up a little, if this strategy is successful, then we will see a lot of problem will go away, because oil and energy imports are the biggest contributor to this CAD. We are importing coal to the tune of $20 billion a year. Now we have the third largest reserves of coal. Now these are very broad questions where we have to introduce, there are political things also involved. If you can't open mine, naturally coal production cannot go up. So these broad issues are involved. CAD is going up not because of one or two things, because of the entire economic policy.
Mr. Gupta, you called it a temporary blip. But we have seen the Indian market, Indian economy being affected by US Fed Reserve the decisions. And US Fed has said no to taper and decided to maintain its bond buying program of 85 billion per month, which has come a sweet surprise for markets across the globe, obviously in India as well. And with expectation that the Fed would taper quantitative ease as the program to pump in money cheaply into battered economy is called by 10-15 billion a month. And in India also, the news of this zero taper was greeted very positively. We saw the markets rallying, the other aspects of economy. So why do you call it a temporary blip when US Fed has not given an indication that money will still keep coming to us? Why would not we have a long-term rally?
As far as CAD is concerned, current account deficit is concerned, I think the fundamental problem is the nature of financing which we adopted of current account deficit. The current account deficit of India is being financed by volatile financial flows, FIIs money and things like that. Now that was the reason, about 80%, according to Financial Stability Report, latest one, 80% of our FIIs flows are volatile. So what you need to do is that you will have to change the pattern of financing your current account deficit. That is on a sustainable basis. By reducing imports, if you cannot reduce imports, certainly some imports cannot be reduced, however we may wish. So
you can increase your exports.
You have to increase your exports, and you will have to think of increasing your FDI, which is of permanent type, depending less on financial flows of FII's portfolio. Now that is the solution. Why our rupee was under pressure and current account deficit became a concern a few days back, things were looking very great crisis, and within 2 days before, when Fed chairman said something, things have looking bright. Now this is what I call temporary blip. We have to adopt sustainable policies, and that calls for a proper planning. We can have the financial flows to tide over the temporary problems. That's okay, but we'll have to develop it, and for that lot of domestic policies are required. What we need, the domestic policy. Supply side constraints, infrastructure constraints to be removed, export strategies to be worked out, manufacturing has to be kicked up, investment cycle need to be revived, savings, particularly household savings, should be ensured that they go to the financial sector, not to the physical sector. These are some of the basic issues on which the government have to take number of measures, and they do not fall within the purview of RBI credit policy. RBI credit policy is one of the supportive pillars.
We were talking about the tapering of quantitative easing in USA. But even if the US had tapered the quantitative easing, the quantum of funds flow into India, my understanding would not have come down by much. In fact, even if the possibility of a QE taper had already been factored into market valuation in India, as analysts say, how do you see that decision of the Fed on the Indian, the corporate side, because there will be more funds coming, although you mentioned that funds are coming into bonds. But do you think that the money which can also come in other sectors of the economy?
See, there are two types of funds, as mentioned. I mean, FII funds and FDI funds. Now, FII funds are basically inherently volatile. They will come in when the time is good, they will flow out when after profit taking and all that. One has to take that into account. If you are allowing FII money to flow in, you have to be prepared
both in the bond and equity. Both in the bond and equity.
FDI is different. FDI is investment in physical assets, creation of capacity. So that is what we should encourage. And now see what is happening. Some of the biggest projects running into $10-20 billion investment are running away because they are not getting iron ore mines, they are not getting
necessary clearances,
environment, this, that. Now you have to take a stand on that, whether you are giving land for greenfield projects. If there is coal in a tribal area, now do you let that coal remain there forever in deference to tribal rights, or you devise some ways of getting that coal, meeting the tribal right, compensate them in other ways. If some coal is lying in forest area, you mine it or don't mine it. If you have to mine it, then create alternative forestry elsewhere. Like that, we have to take these basic decisions. If you don't take those decisions, these are broad decisions which I have been talking about. So unless these are taken care of, naturally the entire economic system is not functioning properly. How can we grow at to a double-digit level, which is our potential? We almost had 8, and now growing at half that number, half that potential. This is because our investment is not happening and investments are being withdrawn. So in that context, the tapering decision is USA's own monetary policy decision. We must take
it. Is when tapering decision, when you look at it, how it is impacting us, don't think from the inflow point of view. The risk is the outflow.
That's right.
That's right. The money will go back to
because you see, the FIIs, the way they work, what will happen is that when things improve United States,
they will go back.
Naturally, they would like to take back the money from here, leaving you high and dry, and you do not have sufficient firepower of domestic institutional investors to counteract it. That's our biggest problem.
See, most critically, China has not been affected by the tapering. Because why? They have huge funds, they have very large manufacturing
SWF, yes.
It doesn't affect them a less, because they don't have a current account deficit. They have a surplus.
Volatility is less there.
There is no volatility. They have, of course, very major domestic problems.
Exactly.
Their banks are facing major problems, and you never know what will happen. But that is separate. They do not have an external financing problem, which we have because of these inherent domestic limitations of our policy or functioning. This is what we have to address as a long-term solution to the CAD or problem or our current is.
We have to strengthen our domestic institutions to take on, and take the economy forward. And let's hope that with the new governor in place and our government's initiative before the elections is announced, we hope the economy is back in the good health, and we can also hope for a double-digit growth. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
You were listening to a discussion on measures to revive economic growth. The participants were D.C. Gupta, former Finance Secretary, Anjan Roy, former Chief Economic Advisor, FICCI, and Sanjay Jha, India Bureau Chief, ITN News, London, who initiated and moderated the discussion. It came to in the program Current Affairs, produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. This program is also available on our website, news.air.nic.in. You may email your opinion about this program at airnsttalks@gmail.com.